Hello and welcome to the 50 Women Over 50 podcast. I'm your host, Sherrilynne Starkie. On this podcast, I highlight women who have broken down barriers, challenged the status quo, or who have simply lived remarkable lives beyond the age of 50. So far, my guests have included pioneering entrepreneurs, passionate activists, artists, educators, and more. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered as together we extol the lives of 50 exceptional women over 50. Today, I am welcoming children's book author Carrie E. Pierce to the show. She shares with us her own journey through grief to a new life in a new community with new friendships and a new positive perspective of life over 50. We talk about her new project, an inspirational service for recently bereaved women to help them through their grief to recovery. Join me in welcoming Carrie to the show. Let's just start talking about your 50th birthday. How did you celebrate?
Well, to be honest with you, and I don't want to be a downer in this interview, my 50th birthday came right on the heels of my father passing from Lewy body dementia. And my mom and I had taken care of him for many years and watched his decline. And he died rather a horrible death. And so my birthday came about 2 months to the day that he passed.
Right.
And I don't know if I would say celebrate is the right word, but my mom and I were very close. And I think we just took the day together and rested from all the trauma we'd encountered and just sat together and tried to find moments of joy in the grief. And it was certainly there. My mom was my best friend, and she just passed away a year and a half ago, just as we were moving to a new state to start a new life. She went into kidney failure and died very unexpectedly of cancer we didn't know she had.
Oh, no.
And so my 50th birthday was sweet, but it was not a happy balloon-filled occasion. So I'm sorry to start your show.
No. That's an interesting observation. So I'm guessing you had so much on your plate, you weren't even slightly worried about I'm over the hill, but you had much bigger concern.
I think there was in the back of my mind a keen awareness that I was now entering the decade where major blows and crushing losses come. And there was a part of my 50s and going into my 50s I did look forward to. I felt like I had always understood there was a coming to peace with yourself, a self-actualization that would occur. And I was looking forward to that. But I was also keenly aware that with that, the possibility was for some profound losses and really getting the stuffing kicked out of me. I started my 50s with the passing of a major person in my life that I loved, my father, and we were very close. I'd been a caregiver to both of my parents for about 30 years, and I then am now tapping off. I'll be 60 in January with the loss of my mom. So I think the foretelling of that feeling of possible doom did come about, but in that, there has also been some awakenings and blessings along the way. So I don't want to lead your listeners to feel that from now on it's just doom and gloom and all downhill, because that is so not true.
Well, let's talk about these awakenings that you mentioned. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, about the time I turned 50 and my father passed, there was a man who owned a business where I used to live, and he was always so full of life. He was always laughing and it's such a joy to see. And then his father passed of dementia. And then his mother died immediately after that. And then he lost his wife.
Oh, no.
So his entire family and a sibling within a year. And after Dad died, I spoke to him a few years into that. And I said, Gary, I don't know how you do it. I just don't know how you've survived all of this. He said, there comes a point where after the worst has happened to you, there is a freedom that eventually comes, because you don't have to live in fear of the worst thing ever happening to you, because it already has. Mm-hmm. And once everybody in your structure is gone, then all of a sudden you finally wake up one day and you realize you can be who you really are. And you can live life on your terms, whereas maybe in the past you didn't have that freedom. And at first it hit me as a disturbing thought that in order to reach there, we have to lose our people and our loved ones. And I thought, I just can't accept that. That's just ghoulish. And it made me angry, but I didn't let him know.
Yeah.
But I chewed on it for a very long time. And he was telling me the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So in the years between my 50th birthday and now almost my 60th, which will be here in a couple months, I have faced my greatest fears. I have faced my most crushing loss. Mm-hmm. I'm still standing, and I am, for the first time now, being afforded the opportunity to find out who and what I really am. And I think as we age, that happens, whether we want it to or not. The losses come. Mm-hmm. The crushing blows come. But if we persevere and we work at it, it's like mining for gold nuggets. Mm-hmm. And I have met, through the process of loss and grief, some astoundingly incredible women my age and into their 80s. They have shared profound stories, their life stories with me, their losses, their overcoming. And I think one of the biggest blessings is you get to become real. You can drop all the pretense, all the fluff and all the stuff that doesn't matter. And I think when you go forth then from that place of real, you can really bond and connect with astounding people, men and women. But the stories that I have had shared with me from my new women friends, astounding stories of overcoming and persevering and achievement. And it's staggering.
I have found the same thing through this series of podcasts because I have met such a wide range of women. This is interview 49. I have met women who have been parents and been childless and who've been married and who's been divorced and who have adopted children and who have had careers or had no careers, who have been dumped like yesterday's newspaper at age 50 and come back from it. And I have met such a range of incredible women who have very generously shared their stories with me and my audience. And I have learned from every single one of them. And I think if I was to tie a bow around it, I would say we are incredible.
Yeah.
Our demographic is incredible. What we have done and achieved and lived through and learned about and then still come back to life and still giving and bringing and growing. And this is the sum total of what I've learned from my podcast. And it sounds like you've had a similar experience.
I think when we're younger, we look at people that we thought were so old and ancient and decrepit, and they're of the age we are now, as not having anything to contribute and on the way out and poor little thing, frail things falling apart, and what a shame. But the truth of the matter is that those are the powerful warriors. And I think now that we're there ourselves, we do recognize, I think women 50 and beyond are astounding warriors. And the things we endure, the things we survive, the things we persevere through. I've known women married 50-something years getting a divorce. And I think it's a journey we are, as women, all eventually called to take. That is the coming to terms with who and what we are. And it can be the hardest work of a lifetime. And it can also be, as I said earlier, an amazing gift. And I think it boils down to solitude versus isolation and loneliness versus freedom. I think we need to really sit down with those and look at them and decide which ones we're going to choose moving forward. But I agree with everything that you've said.
Well, that's a lot to chew on for our audience, isn't it? Let's segue over to a different line of thought. What are you working on these days?
Well, I have my 2 children's books out, and one has won an award, and both of them are entered in some upcoming book competitions. So I have my first children's book out called Abby Appletree. My second one was released this year. It's called The Tale of Tommy Tomlinson's Tennis Shoes. But what I'm really excited about, and I'm co-director of Morgan Pierce Media and Publishing. So we're bringing on new authors and completing other authors' projects. So that's an ongoing thing that we do. But we've just spent the last year working on a project I'm very excited about. And so is my partner, Sandra Morgan. In the course of losing Mom and having to walk the walk and talk the talk of all of this that we're discussing today, I've had to live it all. And I started encountering women, as I mentioned earlier, even up into their 90s, having to do it too. And so from that, I started journaling letters. And I joined with a friend of mine that I met in a grief group who had just lost her husband. And we started compiling our experiences, our pains, our grief journey, the lessons we were learning. And we, with Sandra, developed something called Letters from Elizabeth. And what that is a one-of-a-kind thing. There's not another type of these letters that exist right now. It's a subscription letter service. And you get 25 letters over the course of a year delivered to your mailbox, actual letters.
Okay.
We hired a watercolor artist to develop the monogram and the design of the paper, and they're on very beautiful quality paper. And it's a way of companioning other grieving women our age through the process as they struggle to get on with their life and to find out who and what they are, maybe for the first time in their lives. So Elizabeth is a compilation of my own experience and my friends. Mm-hmm. And these letters are in some cases upwards of almost 12 pages long. So they're very meaty. Okay. They're filled with thoughts about growth and inspirational things and books about grief that help and products that maybe we've used that helped us in our self-care. And it's just a friend that shows up to walk with you twice a month in your mailbox. Because the thing that I noticed was when you're going through deep grief, it takes everything you have just to get out of bed, and you can't even decide what to eat. You're just on total overload. You can't make the slightest decision. You don't feel like going anywhere in public. You don't feel like dealing with anything. And then the people that support you and when grief is fresh, they eventually have to go on with the rest of their lives. So they fall away and you are left alone. And you go out to your mailbox and there's either junk mail or bills. And so we wanted grieving women, 50 and above, to have a friend to show up in their mailbox twice a month and walk with them. And so Letters from Elizabeth is the thing I'm tremendously excited about right now. It's being very well received. And even Real Simple magazine has featured it as a gift suggestion. But what I'm finding is men are really resonating with this concept and idea. And that was surprising.
It is surprising. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. We've had a couple gentlemen contact us and say that they would like to purchase a subscription for a woman who needs it that maybe can't afford it. And they seem very touched that this is out there. And we weren't anticipating that. And so I wished I could answer that question, but it's been very heartwarming to see the reactions. And it's going over well. And it can be found at lettersfromelizabeth.com. But it was just a concept that we felt was important to create. There are other subscription letter services out there doing other topics, but we couldn't really find one intimately addressing the struggle of overcoming grief and finding yourself at midlife and beyond. And everything that is talked about in the letters, we've lived one way or another. And it was just our way of trying to be out there to help and encourage and support women if they're feeling lost during this time.
Well, just taking that in, it just sounds like such a smart idea about having been bereaved myself in the past and understanding the process that you have to go through and what you say about people falling away. It seems like a great way to not feel quite so alone as you're walking through the process. What advice would you give your 30-year-old self?
That's a really good question. I'd have to say three things. I can't narrow it down to one. I would have to say, Don't carry what belongs to other people. Busyness doesn't necessarily equate to success. And let go of your shame and quit running.
Well, it's a lot to unpack there.
And don't eat a lot of sugar. I go like it up that way. Don't eat a lot of sugar. Don't drink too much alcohol, and then do the other things I just said, and then you'll be fine.
Right. Well, let's talk about the shame thing a little bit, because that is a theme that I'm hearing in a lot of my interviews. And I think it's important to call out, because women feel ashamed about things that they're not shameful.
Yeah.
But it has to do with how we're reared and we're conditioned and media influence and everything. But this is one of the things that it just takes experience of life to be able to get over the idea, being ashamed. I totally agree with you about this giving up on feeling ashamed about things.
Well, I think a lot of our shame, our secret shame, probably, and I'm not speaking for everyone, I would like to believe somewhere out there in the world are a couple people that have not been totally squashed by trauma throughout the course of their lives. But I think the fact of the matter is, once you get to this age, everybody has trauma. And if you're honest with yourself, you look back. In my case, my first trauma was when I was 5 years old. And then unaddressed trauma just accrues as you roll down the path of life, and then more traumas happen on top of the trauma you haven't addressed. And I think by the time we reach midlife, we are filled with trauma, and that begets shame. And if you don't finally get so tired of dragging it all behind you that you're willing to sit down and look at some stuff and sift through your giant pile and figure out what is yours and what is somebody else's, and then let all that somebody else's go. Shame is I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a wart. It's some horrible growth that grows out of, I think, in some cases, and probably a lot of cases, unaddressed trauma.
Yes, agreed. And in terms of the range of emotions, shame just impacts everything else. It makes you sad. It makes you angry. It makes you afraid. And then until you can really deal with the core emotion, you're going to be subjected to a litany of other negative emotions that flow on from it.
That is so very true. And I think with that comes the feeling of not enough. I'm not enough. I'm flawed in some horrible way, and I'm just not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not. And I think a lot of women spend their formative years, especially 20s into their 40s, with that tape playing all the time. Whether it's so sad. And I think that is the blessing that comes with midlife. You finally reach a point where you become so miserable that you finally just say no more. And you're willing to do the work. And it wasn't until after Mom died that I finally got my hiney into counseling with a magnificent counselor. And I know a lot of people that view counseling as a weakness. But I think once you get into it and you do it, you realize it is the most important work of your lifetime. And it's also the hardest work of your lifetime, because you have to come to terms with a lot of ghosts stuffed inside of you, other people's ghosts and your own ghosts, that you have to allow to haunt you and not run from them anymore. And there's a part of me that hopes that I will elect to be in counseling the rest of my life, because it has really, truly been healing. And what I think is so interesting is throughout my younger life, I was never able to imagine myself older, as in my 70s. I just could never do it. It was like I was never going to get there, and it just wasn't going to be. But it has only been since I've been in counseling in the last year that I am able to now see a me that is in her 70s. I've never been able to do it before. And I just find that very compelling. It's interesting to me to finally see 70-year-old Carrie. because she's never been there before.
That's an interesting construct, really, in terms of this conversation, because the reason that I started this podcast was I couldn't see myself in my 50s and I was almost about to turn 60. It's more than future self-concept. It's present self-concept. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Yes. I think that it's getting a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. But I'm not there. Like, I can't see myself in my 70s. But I'm not going to lie. I really don't even see myself in my 60s.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it has to do with women in their 60s when you're in your formative years. What you see as women in their 60s. So when I think about my grandmothers in their 60s, and of course you're seeing them through like the lens of youth. So they look really old, right? And decrepit. They have health problems. And that generation of women, they weren't as empowered as we were. And they didn't have the money, the autonomy of having their own money. And they smoked. Yeah. No, they didn't have the health.
Back then, exercise wasn't a thing either. So, yeah.
They didn't have the health that we have. So they were older than we are. But yeah, so I think it's a little bit to do with that. Like when I think of a woman in her 60s, I'm looking for a little old grandma. And I am a grandma, but I don't feel like a little old grandma.
Well, you certainly don't look like one. And I think that's interesting. And I think there are a lot of women out there standing up and saying to these advertisers, especially, that keep going back to that old stereotype of what a 60-year-old woman is. You've got it so screwed up and wrong. Could you and your marketing firm not step back and open your eyes? Because the world has changed so tremendously. And if you look at the Judi Dench's and the Helen Mirrens and these women in their late 70s, early 80s, man, they're going and doing, and they look great. And Carmen, the wonderful model that is in her 90s, I just think we know what the truth is, but I think society is still sticking to the old path because for some reason they haven't decided it's important enough to make the shift.
Well, what are you doing for fun these days?
I've made some lovely friends here in my new community, and they're friends that I can be real with and they can be real with me. They're very dear. So we're in the process of all of us together having adventures and making little bucket lists of things we would like to do. I've recently learned to ferment. So I've been doing kefir water, and I took a class in natural probiotic fermentation, which was very exciting.
I really want to drill down on, because you went right to something that's really important, and that is friendships with women. Because I think that a lot of women over 50 struggle to make friends. Yeah. Especially if something happens, that your situation changes, you move to a new place. And I myself have emigrated 4 times. And so I know about the difficulties of building friendships, but I think it's even more exacerbated in your later years. And because I still have trouble making friends given the nature of my work, because I don't go out to work or I work by myself. Yeah. And so it's still a struggle for me. I really have to make the effort. And I've joined a couple of Facebook groups for women over 50. And this is a theme I see coming up time and time again. Women in these groups saying, I don't have any friends. My kids have grown up and gone. And I'm now I have some time just to hang out, and I've got no one to hang out with, kind of thing. And so how did you turn up in a new community like you have? And like, what were the steps that you took to find these women that are your kindred spirits and your friends?
Well, that's a lot there, and it's important. Studies have shown that women, especially 50 and beyond, that are well connected socially are much healthier. I think we find ourselves, and that is the curse and the gift of midlife. At some point, we find ourselves alone. Mm. We all do. And we will have spent our lives, if we're married, nurturing our families, nurturing our husbands. All of our effort goes into that. Our time is always spent with them, worrying about them, taking care of them. Or we work. I work in my home too. I don't get out much for work unless I'm making appearances or doing something like that. If you are one strong woman, if you've been that degree of alone 4 times, there is an aloneness that most people don't ever experience unless they have done what you and I have done, where you move someplace where 0 people. You might as well move to the moon because you are so keenly aware of how alone you are. And then in the case of Mom, I had to get her to dialysis clinics 3 times a week for appointments through the snow, through blizzards, it was just overwhelming. I had to get her to cancer clinics. I had to race her to the emergency room in the middle of the night. We're doing that all alone. I have the sweetest neighbors, and they started before we even met them. When it would snow at 5 o'clock in the morning, they would come over and shovel my driveway because they knew Mom had to get to dialysis. They knew enough about us to know there's a crisis going on and we have to help these people. They would show up at 5 o'clock in the morning to shovel my driveway so I could get Mom to. And so when we were huddled in our empty house begging for God to save us, there were all these precious people out there just waiting to help. And number 1, pray. And I think pray that the right people be brought to you and that you be put in the right place where your talents and what you have to offer will be received by the people that need your talents and what you have to offer. And so I joined a local online women's group in my community. It's since doubled in size.
Okay.
The women are incredible in this community. And several of them, when I broke my ribs, several of them showed up with food. Can I take you to a doctor's appointment? Can I clean your house? But if you've prayed for guidance and you've prayed to be put in the right place at the right time and for the right people to come into your life, once you take that first step, it all starts. But there are people out there looking for you, looking for what you have to offer, needing you, needing to hear your story. And don't stay isolated and don't stay afraid. So that's a big soapbox for me, obviously, but it's
just drawing the strands from that. It's at the same time, you have to be brave and you have to be vulnerable at the very same time. And
that is so hard to do.
It's a heady mix, that's for sure.
Yeah, it makes your head spin. And it takes everything that you have to maintain balance in that, because that's a cocktail that is, it's profound.
It's okay. Switching tracks now onto the quick round. So this is fun Q&A. Anything off the top of your head? What are you reading? What are you watching? What are you binging? Is there something you would recommend?
Well, let's see what I'm reading. I got 3 things going right now. So I'm reading Hope is the First Dose by Dr. W. Lee Warren. And that's been a very good book. I'm reading Imperial Woman by Pearl S. Buck. Her writing is so brilliantly delicious. And you talk about an inspirational woman. Her story is very inspirational, especially from a writing standpoint. And then somebody suggested to me in my grief that I read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. So I have those 3 going. See, the C.S. Lewis book is short, and I'm about to finish up the Hope is the First Dose book. I was binge watching Monarch of the Glen, which was filmed in the early 2000s, and it's set in Scotland, but I've gotten to season 6 now, and the wheels are coming off, and it's unfortunate because I bonded with the characters and I loved them, but I think that happens in productions where you invite different directors and different writers each time, and then the characters just get all pear-shaped and squashed in on themselves. Yeah. And so I finally just had to leave them because the stories were making me not feel good, and they used to make me laugh and be so touched, and I'm just leaving it. So I've invested my life into 6 seasons of this, and now I just have to say, I'm sorry, we got to break up because it's just not working. Yeah.
Are you involved in any good works in the community or supporting any charities you'd like to recommend?
I do a lot of charity work. At this point, I feel it is so important to help at the community level, and also charities that bring light. I think the world has become so dark that it's imperative that we do light. So I'm always participating in charities that help animals at a community level, and also things like Union Gospel Mission in my community. I like there to be a godly component, a light component to the charities that I contribute to, and some other churches around the country, and actually one in India that I've contributed to for a long time. And it's very important to do that.
Is there an app you couldn't live without?
Well, that's an interesting question. I am by choice, a dinosaur. We use the software programs that we need to use, like the screenwriting and the book editing and all of that. I'm jiggy with and great with that. But I don't like to be that plugged in my personal life. I thank heavens for GPS. I'd be totally, literally, and figuratively lost without GPS. I don't do apps.
And is there an over 50s life hack that you would like to recommend?
I would have to say sleep, rest, and replenish. Because in my youth, and especially when I worked in the film industry, I would work sometimes 28, 30-hour days. And I thought, oh, I'm just so busy and important and wonderful. That's such a crock. I think rest is so astoundingly important, but it's not just physically and mentally and emotionally important. I think it's spiritually important to feed your soul and your heart, to just sit with yourself, have a cup of tea, sit in front of the fireplace, just sit with yourself, have a glass of wine, sit with yourself every now and then.
Well, I think it's excellent advice. And I've had other interviewees contribute similar things, but certainly the importance of sleep and rest is a theme that I hear a lot.
I think we view it when we're younger as a horrible weakness and a frailty and a failing. But I think as you become wise, you realize the importance of it, because you have not much to contribute. And that's a sad waste.
Oh, it's the truth. That's entirely the truth. If you can't replenish yourself, you've got nothing to bring.
Yeah, that's true.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with my audience that I haven't asked you?
I think there is a power and a magic to midlife and beyond. I think once you step into the wisdom that midlife contains, it is a totally transformative time for the better if we allow it to be. And I think it's extremely important to turn off what society says we should be.
This has been 50 Women Over 50, a podcast for women whose personal confidence is born of experience. Thank you to my guest, Carrie E. Pierce, a children's book author, publisher, and entrepreneur. I really love talking to Carrie about life in middle age. She's so full of wisdom and practical advice. And although we discuss some very sad events in her life and her grief, her optimism and energy shine through. We're left with feelings of hope and excitement about all the opportunities that come in life after 50. See the show notes to find links to Carrie's books, her socials, letters from Elizabeth, and to information about some of the many things that we talked about on today's show. And thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed the show, please share a link to it with your friends and drop me a rating or a review on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also find my show on YouTube, and please follow me on social too. Let's connect and create a whole community of wise women over 50. See you next time for my very last interview on the 50 Women Over 50 podcast. I'm your host, Sherrilynne Starkie.